Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor, and I'm coming back to the Institute some 40 years after I passed out. So it's truly a joyous occasion to be here with all of you. So my school day used to begin and end with the long bell. And I would be waiting for this long bell because then it would be time for me to go home. The rest of the day was spent in avoiding the teacher's eye because she just might ask me a question that I would not know the answer to. Or maybe she would chuck the duster at me. So the second last bench was my safety space. I'd like all of you to just close your eyes for a minute if you can, and just think, if I say the word education system, what do you visualize? What do you see? Please indulge me. Close your eyes for a minute. Don't fall asleep. But just think, if I say school, if I say education system, what do you visualize? Right, you can open your eyes now. Probably it was something like this, which is a hierarchical system with schools right at the bottom, or you are imagining students going, trooping from one room to the other. Every 40 minutes, the bell rings, and in many schools, the children are probably putting their fingers on their lips. So it's quite a mechanized system in which we have literally a machine process, the education machine, where students are going into this machine. They go in with so much diversity, and they come out the way they have come out in this particular picture. So the education machine that we have all put together is really the input process. And it sounds familiar, right? Inputs, process, product, you test it, you grade it, and you package it. And you might just find that there are a large number of us do not pass. It was a miracle. I think my parents also thought it was a miracle that I got through grade 10 and actually got accepted into grade 11. So there must be a lot of us who have had this anxiety when the grading time came. And many of you are probably going through it right now. So what has happened in this education machine? We've created subject silos. There's a physics subject, there's a history subject, there's a math subject, and we don't really see the interconnections between these subjects. If I think back, right, it took me a long time before the pin dropped, and I actually made sense that a linear equation actually is the description of a line. I just didn't make sense of it when I learned in algebra something and in geometry something else. Those two never came together. School somehow separates what we learn in the classroom from what's happening in real life. And then, because we have such large numbers, and it's very convenient, and we are following the education machine model, we have standardized and homogenized learning. All of us get the same process, the same inputs, the same content, and sometimes, I'm going to use a metaphor, a fish might be tested for whether it can fly. And maybe that's what has happened to many of us. So students become like raw materials. And teachers are, like what Scheffler said, minor technicians who are given manuals, literally manuals with lesson plans to follow. And in this process, what happens to the student? Their natural curiosity, their sense of inquiry, their ability to explore, to discover, to create, all of that is just killed. What is the fuel for this machine? It's really fear and anxiety. Right from the time this little kid goes into preschool, it is about performance, it is about putting things into them and making them so afraid that the entire process becomes a joyless transaction rather than a transformative journey, which education was supposed to be. But it was not always like this. And this is where I'm talking about the beautiful tree that Gandhiji referred to. This is in a speech he made in Chatham House in 1931, almost a century ago. I say without fear of my figures being challenged successfully that today India is more illiterate than it was 50 or 100 years ago. Because the British administrators, when they came to India, instead of taking hold of things as they were, began to root them out. They scratched the soil and began to look at the root and left the root like that. And the beautiful tree perished. So what was this beautiful tree? There's a lot of research, particularly done by Dharampalji, and he wrote a book by the same name, in which he talked about the living, breathing, rooted ecosystem of learning that we had. A large, decentralized system with lakhs of schools, pathshalas, gurukulas, madrasas, groups of students sitting in temple corridors. And it was just a very vibrant ecosystem in which children were learning, thriving, and flourishing. There was a sacred relationship between the student and the teacher. And this sacred relationship included things like observation, conversation, dialogue, being able to do, and in this process, actually becoming. And this organic learning process was anchored in this idea of the self, but also the role that every individual would be playing in society, in their families, in the nation, and for the world, because we talk about Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So we see these vestiges even today in terms of an apprentice sitting with the master, learning to weave. And there's this very subtle love relationship between the master and the apprenticeship. You can see in the Kalaripayattu schools where there is a relationship between the master, love and care, but tough love too when needed, because Kalaripayattu requires discipline. So it is this very subtle kind of pressure that the teacher would put, tough love. So we are seeing these vestiges. But now, because I have been involved with the National Curriculum Framework, and the National Education Policy has actually created the pathways for us to start looking at how we can regenerate the education system, I wanted to give you a couple of examples of what is already happening. So the National Curriculum Framework is really aiming for a transformative shift and taking us from being Homo economicus to looking at the whole human being. And in this, there is a beautiful Indian concept called the Panchakosha, which is one of the pillars of the National Curriculum Framework. So it has the 5 sheaths. You can see them there: Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha, and Anandamaya Kosha. So how does education help to develop all these 5 sheaths? So it is not just about the knowledge aspect, but a more holistic idea. So we have tried to bring some of this into the textbook. And since I have been involved also with the writing of the social science textbooks for middle stage, and it is middle stage, which means that there is no pressure for the teacher or the student to achieve the so-called learning outcomes within a year. There is space for freedom, for curiosity, for trying, for exploring. So if you look at these two examples that I'm going to show you now, one is the idea that we need to provide spaces for creativity and imagination at very young ages. And the minute that we are talking about entrepreneurship, for example, imagination is integrated into entrepreneurship. So how do we hone that? And the textbook actually enables us to do that. So in Let's Explore, we are saying, let your imagination run. We're giving you the permission for your imagination to run. And then there is the aspect of the spiritual dimension, the Anandamaya Kosha, which is urging students to explore, stop, explore. And if you notice the illustration there, it is a lion and a cow drinking from the same pot. So it's urging the student to think, what does this actually mean? What does it mean? And if I was to observe myself in times of anxiety, in terms of anger, in times when I'm feeling the urge to be violent, maybe, can I stop and observe myself and learn about who I am, who am I becoming? These are pictures that are taking the spirit of the National Curriculum Framework into the field. These are students who are learning about systems, living systems, and how they work in the run of Kutch. Now, one would think that this is a run of Kutch is, just a salt pan, but there is life there. And what is it going to teach students when they are able to see the life in the salt pan? The other picture is of students from Uttarakhand who are learning professional bird watching, which means that they are actually learning in some ways a vocational skill while also re-establishing the connect with nature, which we have lost. So what is happening is these kids are learning that you can make a living also by doing things that you love. These are kids who are building a tree house. Now this is really amazing because it's bringing in multiple disciplines, as you can see. It requires, apart from knowledge of mathematics, measurement, etc., it's also teaching them something that they are going to need in the days to come, which is how do you work together? How do you collaborate? How do you have each other's back? Now, if a kid falls, what will it mean? And so taking responsibility for others on your team. These kids are also growing their own food, which means they are seeing that soil is not dead. It is not dirt. Soil actually is life and life-giving. So these are ways in which education is coming alive for these students. So there is a very interesting idea in the National Education Policy called school complex. And school complexes can be seen as living networks because ultimately they are about human beings. So how can we create these local, place-based opportunities for people to come together as communities? Communities of learning, communities to share resources, communities for collaboration, actually including doing collaborative research and collaborative action research, which can add value for that community. And how can everybody who is part of this school complex, and they're all human beings, right? It's not a hierarchical structure. How can they participate and play their roles within this school complex to create the abundance that can enable thriving of the schools? So we are really in a time of polycrisis. This is a diagram that's from the Stockholm Resilience Center, which is showing us we have crossed 7 out of 9 planetary boundaries. and we are in a polycrisis. So we have inequities, we have mental health issues, all getting exacerbated, a lot of unpredictability, and AI as well, which is completely disrupting everything that we knew so far. What we could predict has become unpredictable. So the future needs our young people to be lifelong learners, to become resilient, to learn to be adaptive, to be creative, to collaborate, and to co-create. And mechanistic thinking, input, process, output, is not going to help us in creating these kind of spaces for young people. So we really need living systems thinking. So what I would urge is, can we create a system together, anchored in love, in care, in nourishing, in nurturing, in a way that enables thriving and flourishing of every young person for co-creating the future that we want? And the policy does create the enabling conditions for it, but it's only when people actually do the work of regeneration. Can we do this with love in our hearts, empathy in our understanding, and care in our actions? Let's try and regenerate this beautiful tree which can nurture and sustain life. I hope that all of us can come together on this journey, and that I am not just a lone dreamer, and that all of you will join me in realizing this dream. Thank you.